Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and good afternoon. It's officially afternoon here in the Central Time Zone. And welcome to the second session of Gardening in the Panhandle Live. So this session is going to focus primarily on turf grass. Lawns are funny things. They're probably the #1 question that we get as horticulture agents. It seems like the clients that ask us about turf grass fall into 2 categories. They either undermanage the turf and are intimidated by lawns and sort of the nuances of turf. And, you know, we get a lot of that. And you may be one of those. And then there's those that sort of overmanage it and spend way too much time and money on it, and often wind up killing it with kindness. Both of these are problems. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, as is with most things. Growing a lawn that's reasonably attractive really isn't that hard, but it is nuanced. And it does require some planning and considerations that hopefully you're going to get a review on today. With that said, let's meet our panelists today. So we'll start on my screen from the left, Larry Williams. I'm going to get you guys to sort of introduce yourself, provide a quick background, and then throw it back to me. So Larry, let's hear it.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm Larry Williams. I'm the residential horticulture agent in Okaloosa County. Work primarily with homeowners and the Master Gardener program.
Excellent. Mark Tansig.
All right, hello folks, I'm Mark Tansig. I work at the Leon County Extension Office in Tallahassee, Florida, and I am a residential and commercial horticulture agent. So I help, like Larry, work with residential clientele, Master Gardener volunteers, and also do training for commercial lawn and landscape professionals. Good morning, good afternoon.
And let's head way out west to Beth Bowles.
Hello, welcome from Pensacola. I'm Beth with Escambia County Extension. I work with the homeowners, horticulture professionals, and Master Gardener volunteers. So we're excited for a wonderful hour.
Yeah, that's awesome. We've got a really good panel here for you. I wanted to recognize we got a couple of people behind the scenes, Julie McConnell, Matt Orwatt, and Matt Lawler, all extension agents that are helping us. In an actual, I guess, theater setting, it literally would be behind the scenes, but here on virtual, I don't know what you call it, but we'll still call it behind the scenes. So thank you guys for helping facilitate this. So a little housekeeping before we get started. We have lots of questions to get to and a limited amount of time to do it. We're going to do our best to get to all of them. If you guys think of something that you want to ask during the session, just include it in either in the chat or in the Q&A. If we have time to get to it at the end, we'll certainly do that. For those of you watching on Facebook, same deal applies to you. Just put it in there in the comments section, and some of our wonderful facilitators will do their best to get those to me, and we'll try to get to those by the end of our session. But with that, let's learn a little bit about turf. So we're going to start, I've broken these down by topic within turf grass. We're going to start with some turf grass selections. Some selection questions. So this question comes from Zoom. We're going to start with Beth. Beth, what type of lawn is most disease resistant, most pest resistant, dense enough to crowd out the invasive weeds, and requires the least maintenance? So basically, what is the perfect turf grass?
Perfect turf grass. So this question is going to take us about 45 minutes to get through. When we talk about low maintenance grass, really your options, you're looking at the ones that are considered low maintenance, which would be Bahia grass. Many people may not always like the look of Bahia. We kind of consider that a roadside grass, but it is very low maintenance and can be attractive in the lawn. It's just going to have a little more of an open growth habit and be very low needing a fertilizer and very drought tolerant. Another one that you're more familiar with is centipede grass. It's not necessarily going to have the same deep dark color as some of our others, but you really don't have to treat this one like the others. It doesn't like a lot of care in order to be healthy and look good.
The poor man's grass, right?
The which one?
The poor man's grass.
The poor man's grass. The reason I love centipede is I kind of let mine go to seed and it reseeds for me to kind of help my lawn a little bit. But really, you know, for all of these issues you mentioned with diseases and weeds, it's really a well-maintained, healthy lawn that's going to resist those problems. There's always going to be something with all of these grasses that come along, but even some of the ones we consider higher maintenance, if you manage it well, which we're going to talk about how to do all that today, hay, you're going to have fewer of those problems. So management is the key, and we're going to hit on a lot of those points as we go through. But you may want to look at selecting a Florida grass. There's a handout that's going to be put up in your chat box. You can go to that link and then decide which one's really suitable for you based on what you need too. You know, one that where you have dogs is going to be different from one that you just want to look fairly nice and be uniform. So remember those factors too.
Yeah, so remember guys, when I said turf grass care and selection is nuanced. It's a nuanced topic. So it depends on, the long story short, it depends, huh, Beth? So.
It does depend always. We can have a zoysia that's the highest maintenance ever, or you can have a zoysia with a little lower maintenance. So all of them have, you know, depending on what you want.
Sounds good. So all things being equal, lower maintenance typically are Bahia and Centipede grass, but depending on how you manage them and what you're looking for, it may depend. So let's go to Mark Tansig from a Zoom question. Mark, this is sort of along the same lines as Beth's question. What's the best turf grass for zone 8A? So a little bit north. So you're in the very far reaches of Florida to the north.
Yeah, I wonder if this person is in Florida or maybe they're in Georgia, because I think it's just a little sliver that gets down into Florida, right?
Yeah, so maybe we're in South Georgia, South Alabama. That's okay. Let's go ahead. What would be your pick?
So, I mean, the good thing is it's just like with Beth said, it's all about, you know, selecting on what your site is going to support and what you're looking for. So the same turf grasses that we can use in zone 8B are really, and the rest of the panhandle are going to apply to you in 8A. You can use that same turf grass selector. You know, you want to look at your soil type, your sunlight, and then again, what you are willing to maintain, what kind of look you're going for, and then pick one of those. But it's going to be similar to the ones in 8B.
That's good. I would add to that you know, zoysia, if you choose to go zoysia, is going to be one of the last grasses to green up, you know, in the spring.
Good point.
So the farther north you get, the later you have to wait until you get green grass if you go with zoysia. So just keep that in mind as far as that goes. So, but good answer. Thank you. Larry, Beth sort of danced around this a little bit. This question comes from Zoom. What is the best lawn for children and pets? So I assume this is going to be a high traffic lawn where kids and pets are going to be playing. What would you recommend to this client?
Well, when you narrow it down to just that option, you kind of end up with Bermuda grass or zoysia grass. Both of those have better wear tolerance. They will stand up to foot traffic, which would be what you usually expect with children playing on a surface like that, and as well as pets. There's a reason why Centipede and St. Augustine are not used on athletic fields like football fields. They're just not wear tolerant. It would tear them to pieces. They lack the below ground runners. They only have the stolons, which are above ground runners.
Good point.
Bermuda grass and zoysia grass both have above ground and below ground runners. So they have that below ground tissue to recover when the top is really, sometimes looks like it's been destroyed, but a lot of times it'll make a comeback with proper care. So Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, I'd say cultivar dependent, and take a look at the turf grass selection. I think there's a link that will be placed if it's not already there under chat. But I would either go with Bermuda grass or zoysia grass. Bermuda grass lacks shade tolerance. So if you, in a mixed landscape where you have trees and other things that might create a considerable amount of shade, you would have to go with one of the zoysia grass cultivars.
That makes sense to me. That's a good answer. That's now that you say it, I've never played golf on St. Augustine grass.
You never will.
And I never will. So yeah, so choose a wear tolerant grass for if you have, you know, if you're wanting a lawn where children, you know, where there's going to be a after Christmas, you know, Thanksgiving football game taking place, or your dogs are going to be running around. Maybe you're going to go with the zoysia or Bermuda. Thank you, Larry. Hey, Beth, so we got a question here from Zoom. Recommendations for sod. Okay, before we get any farther, this goes right back to what Larry was saying there, but this is another one of those, we want to have our cake and eat it 2 questions. The preface there. Recommendations for sod that will grow well in a shaded area. under the canopy of an oak tree on the north side of the yard. So I'm thinking we're probably talking a live oak here, so probably fairly heavy shade. And on the north side of the yard, the north side tends to be the shady part anyway. Can grass grow in full shade?
The quick answer, no. Okay, next. No, the thing about turf, it's going to need sunlight. That's how it makes its food. That's how it's going to get energy to grow and reproduce and continue to spread and be a healthy, resilient grass for you. So although we do have some grasses that will tolerate a little bit of shade, we really grow turf where it gets sunlight. So those grasses that are going to tolerate a little bit of shade tend to fall in the St. Augustine group. And there are some cultivars that do better than others, and some of the dwarfs are probably the most shade tolerant of all. And then zoysias. There are some zoysia cultivars that are shade tolerant, not all of them. That's really important for you to know. Palisades is pretty shade tolerant. El Toro does pretty well, but one of the most common ones, Empire, is not. It's not going to like those shaded environments. But this type of environment of an oak tree, whether it's a live oak or a magnolia, you may start with grass and it looks good for a very short time. What we're going to call, you're going to give us a call. We're going to talk to you about thinning grass, weeds filling in those spots. So just look for an alternative. There's wonderful Florida plants or mulched areas or seeding, lots of other landscape design aspects that you can try in those really heavily shaded areas.
That makes sense. Unfortunately, we have, landscape contractors and stores and retailers and different things. Somebody says, I want a shade tolerant grass. And, they do point them to St. Augustine or zoysia correctly, but they, fail to mention that, your expectations of what that turf grass is going to look like need to change. Like you said, it's going to be thin. You're going to have to mow it higher. You're going to deal with weeds. So can be in the short, it can be done, but your expectations are going to have to change, and you might be better off with having a mulched flower bed or one of those other ground covers. So.
Yeah, and before you spend that money, give your local agent a call and talk it over with us, and we can really help you decide if that's a suitable location.
Absolutely. Always give your local IFAS Extension agent a call. So that sort of takes care of turf grass selection. So we're going to move to one of the favorite topics here, lawn weed control. So everybody's got weeds. Some of us have more weeds than others. We won't name names or make you raise your hand, but that's okay. Yeah, Mark Tansig, he has a weedy lawn and he likes it. So we have a Zoom question for Larry Williams. Larry, I've got a new St. Augustine sod. I have new St. Augustine sod and have a few weeds coming up. Should I pull them or use atrazine or another herbicide? What you say?
You got to be careful with a new lawn, whether it's sodded or sprigged or seeded. In the case of St. Augustine, you have to start vegetatively, so it would be either sodded or plugged. But most lawn herbicides are restricted to being used only after the lawn is well established, and that's very important. Read the particular herbicide product label and see what it states, but I don't know of any real exceptions. And you have to be very careful about heat as well. So we move out of the spring into the consistently warm, hot summer months. Most herbicides will tell you, there'll be a statement on the label that says pretty much this: do not use this product when the temperature is expected to be 85 or above. So you got those restrictions, and those statements are on that pesticide label, the herbicide, for a reason. You may have to just grin and bear it and get through this time until the herbicides allow you to, based on the label, to use them. Good mowing practices, good management practices otherwise is pretty much all that you're going to be able to do, unless you're willing to hand pull. If there's a few weeds, that's an option. But be very cautious about use of herbicides early in a lawn's life. Some may be restricted until maybe a year after the lawn is established.
Yeah.
So be very cautious about that.
Yeah, generally 60 to 90 days, wouldn't you say something like that to establishment?
Yes.
So yeah, for the first 2 or 3 months of that newly sodded lawn's life, you're gonna you're going to leave it alone, you know, as far as chemicals are concerned. Like Larry said, we're going to mow, we're going to pull here and there, and we're going to deal with it until it gets established. So thanks, Larry. That's a good answer. All right, Beth, I have a Bermuda grass lawn, but apparently this person doesn't. Is there a way to kill or get rid of the invasive Bermuda type grass without harming centipede grass? Also for St. Augustine grass. So Dr. Brian Under, our colleague, calls Bermuda grass the world's worst weed. So what can we do?
It is for a lot of people, especially, you know, Daniel, you have it for your lawn, but if you don't want that as your lawn and you have centipede or St. Augustine, it is a horrible weed to try to deal with. The big issue with this is, you know, when you sod, it may come in sometimes with a few pieces of sod or come in from another area or in a potted plant. A lot of ways it can get there, or from a neighbor. But once you have it, you don't have a lot of options. There's not a lot of selective products for a residential lawn to kill this out. A lot of the things you may hear about that are selective for centipede, especially, there's a grass killer called sethoxidime. It's really only going to suppress that Bermuda grass. It's not going to kill it. And so that's not really a good option for a homeowner. In St. Augustine, those products aren't even labeled for St. Augustine, so you can't even use them. So really, unfortunately for homeowner, you're really looking at killing that whole area out with a broad spectrum. If you choose to dig it out, remember, like Larry mentioned earlier, it has above ground runners and below on Bermuda. So you usually have to dig very deeply. But we usually will recommend like a glyphosate product, moving where you see the Bermuda a little bit beyond, and then coming back and reestablishing your desirable grass. Other than that, you kind of are going to have to accept that it's part of your grass and have a mixed lawn. But our friends at University of Georgia have a really good publication that's been shared with you in the chat box on managing Bermuda in lawns. So you can kind of read over that and get some extra information.
Yeah. You know, my dad deals with this problem a little bit, his centipede grass, you know, and there's nothing inherently wrong with Bermuda. It's still grass, you know, it gives him the surface that he wants. The problem is he wants centipede, and, you know, the Bermuda, when you cut it to the height of the centipede, it'll brown out, you know, it gives these obvious areas of the lawn that's not what he wants. So I can see what this person's saying. Bermuda's a terrible weed if it's where you don't want it. Like Beth said, those characteristics that Larry talked about that makes it a good playing turf also make it an excellent weed. So Larry, back to you. Question from Zoom. How can I keep centipede grass from invading and taking over my St. Augustine lawn? So related to the question we just asked Beth, but this time we have a St. Augustine lawn and we have centipede kind of infiltrating. What can we do?
Well, unfortunately, I know of no herbicide option for removing or preventing centipede grass in a St. Augustine grass lawn. When you have two grasses.
Larry, real quick, we had the lady who asked this question just sent me a message on our chat box and said she meant to say, I meant to get rid of the Bahia grass in the centipede. So how do I keep Bahia grass from invading and taking over my centipede, it says. Let's switch gears on that.
Okay, if it is centipede, be very careful about this. Centipede, and Beth mentioned this, I think there was something already mentioned in the chat about this, the use of sethoxidime, which is sold under various brand names. That is a herbicide. It was originally developed for controlling grasses, true grasses, not broadleaf weeds. They found out for some reason centipede has some tolerance to sethoxidime. It's sold under, I think the name Post and Vantage. There may be some other products with sethoxidime. It can be used based on the label directions, always read that, over the top of a centipede grass lawn. I mentioned being careful with temperatures. We're moving into the summer months. I would hold up on using most lawn herbicides now for that reason alone. You start hitting 85 plus degrees consistently, you're asking for problems with the combination of the chemical, the herbicide, and the temperature can burn your lawn. You don't want to do that. But when temperatures are correct and when the Bahia grass is green and growing, not when it's dormant, in the spring, basically again in the fall, you can treat with a sethoxidime herbicide over the top of the centipede and suppress the Bahia. You might also be able to use some pre-emergent herbicides to minimize seeds from coming up from the Bahia, but that's pretty much it. The use from a chemical standpoint, the use of a cetoxidum, correct use of cetoxidum herbicide.
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience, so I can back up what Larry says. So cetoxidum will suppress it, but I've had trouble actually killing grass outright in the centipede. Another one of those things where you can suppress it and kind of deal with what's left. But yeah,
And Daniel, one thing
Yeah.
too, sometimes we could kind of alter the pH a little bit
this is
and
true.
make it more suitable for the St. Augustine versus over a grass that likes a more acid soil. I mean, it may not kill it outright, but we just may make the environment less suitable for the grass we don't want.
This is true. So we're going to get into some nuanced cultural and management practices later, and I think you'll see that you know, just kind of modifying your cultural practices can really go a long way to getting the turf that you want. So
Yeah, I was going to say, Dana, add to that, the mowing
Yes,
height,
sir.
you know, Centipede's mowed much shorter than Bahia, and that can help stress out your Bahia. Again, just something else to try to slow it down as much as you can.
yeah, so it's going to be kind of we say integrated pest management. So in this case, we have Bahia as our pest. We're using an integrated approach. Maybe we use some cetoxidum over the top. Maybe we reduce our mowing height a little bit. You know, maybe we keep our pH low in this case for centipede, or high in the case if we wanted St. Augustine. Bahia may not like that quite as much. So good answers, folks. Thanks for that discussion. Beth, we'll go back to you for a Zoom question. This is a really common one, particularly in the area of Florida that get wet, which is the Panhandle a lot of times. So how do you get rid of dollar weeds?
I think this is a weed everyone can identify. Everyone knows dollarweed, and there's probably groups out there, you know, kill dollarweed, and there's a few that actually in parts of the country grow this as a lawn or a potted plant, or who knows. But for us, dollarweed is one of our most difficult weeds because it loves water. And what do we have here? Frequently rainfall, and we also have homeowners that love to irrigate. So we're going to kind of get on to you a little bit about your irrigation practices, because dollarweed is a perennial. We're not going to prevent it with pre-emergence. We can prevent it by not getting it started in our area in sometimes, but you have to reduce the water in order to start managing dollarweed. So you're going to learn about how to set that system and when to water a little bit later in the program, but start with that. If you can't do that, you're just going to have to accept dollarweed many times. So you reduce the water. There are some chemicals that are labeled. Some of these chemicals that have shown some success are really horticulture professional chemicals. You may need to get them to come in that work very well, like a Certainty on dollarweed. And the timing may not be when you think. You may not be spraying in the middle of summer when you're irrigating when it's raining. You may be spraying more in the fall when that dollarweed kind of is really ramping back up with those cooler temperatures. Also remember, these chemicals that you may use are not always fast acting. They're not just going to kill it right out the next day. They may take weeks to work. In the past, we've recommended Atrazine. A lot of the new products for homeowners have a really low percentage, so you may not see the success with Atrazine. And you also have to be very careful about how you use that reading the label, because there are some environmental concerns with Atrazine. The kind of triple products you find usually contain a 2,4-D. Those are acceptable, but be careful with Centipede and St. Augustine, because sometimes the 2,4-D triple mix products like a Speed Zone that may be effective are going to injure and kind of cause some yellowing in some of your desirable grasses. So really right now is not your best time to think about it. Maybe think about it as we go into the fall and consider talking to some professionals to get some help with that. It's never going to be, it's gone. You're always going to have to kind of come back and spot treat a little bit of dollarweed.
Yeah, I like that last point you made, that it's never going to be gone. You know, it's important to realize that dollarweed is a native plant and it wants to be here. And so I've had clients that have success with some of those products that Beth's talking about, Certainty, Celsius. But like she said, a lot of those contain 2,4-D, dicamba. And as Larry mentioned earlier, those are not going to be able to be applied in drift volatility conditions. So temperatures above 85, 90 degrees, which is pretty much every day from here to about the middle of September. So and like Beth said, just pay attention. Maybe consider hiring a landscape professional. Definitely consult your local extension agents on this, and just be willing to sort of dig in your heels and fight dollarweed. It can be done, but it's a long-term event, or just kind of enjoy it.
You know, one other thing, Daniel, if all you have is dollarweed and you can reduce the water, it may be where you just kill out the whole area and start over too. You know,
Yeah.
that is an option. Maybe a selective herbicide is really not for you at that stage.
This is true. And I've seen some clients before, maybe we can talk about this for a second before we move on from dollarweed, because this is such a hot topic. Is, you know, I've gone to a site visit where maybe we're next to a retention pond or just a wet weather area that the homeowner is attempting to grow turf grass in and battle that dollarweed. Should they, I mean, in that situation, it's almost, what would you do there?
You know, sometimes you have to look at plants in a different way. You call it a ground cover. It's very successful. We did this on Pensacola Beach. You know, they were trying to manage in the median dollarweed, and I said, just call it a nice ground cover at the beach. And you have a green, very shiny leaf that can be attractive.
Yeah, mow it a couple of inches high so you don't see the other weeds, and you more or less have a dollarweed ground cover. So good idea. If you've got an area that you can't control the irrigation or it just stays wet, you know, that may be an option for you. So thanks, Beth. That was really good. Larry, Mark, I promise we'll get back to you in just a minute. I hadn't forgotten about you. Larry, I have Raleigh St. Augustine grass. I'm sorry you have a real weed problem, both grassy and broadleaf. So what type of weed killer, when and how to apply, and I need something that's okay for birds. So again, we want our cake and we want to eat it too. Help us out.
This is pretty general when it comes to weed control, but based on the life cycle of the weeds, there's lots of different weeds. It's a former weed specialist, turfgrass specialist with University of Florida. Years ago, I remember he said that there's over 100 common lawn weeds, over 100 that are common. Not saying all those that are not common, but
right.
We have a lot. It's a numbers game. So based on the life cycle of the weeds, whether it's the weeds that you're targeting happen to be summer annuals, winter annuals, a perennial, there are even biennial weeds. We'd have to know specifically the weed, or at least the category that you're dealing with. You can use pre-emergent herbicides for lawns, such as pendimethalin. That's a common active ingredient for homeowners and as a pre-emergent herbicide, pendimethalin. You can use that in February when you're targeting summer annual weeds. So you're putting the herbicide out before the weeds come up, just before the weeds begin to emerge. Right. In October is the time if you're targeting winter annuals. So I'm just giving you a broad answer here without knowing the particular weeds you're dealing with.
Yeah, they didn't mention a specific weed, so I think that's
so. Okay, so you want to use appropriate post-emergent herbicides as well. Again, when temperatures are 85 or less, and when the weeds are present, when they're actively growing, you want to follow the environmental precautions on the pesticide label, in this case, the herbicide label, related to wildlife. It'll be there, and there may be some specific things related to precautions related to wildlife. And definitely don't feed and attract birds to the lawn areas that you intend to treat. That's kind of the best I can do with this. And there is a link, I think, that has been posted to the chat for weed management. It's a weed management guide for Florida lawns.
Definitely check that out, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Yeah, so I will say one thing for birds. In my past nursery experience, we did pay attention to this a little bit. It does seem that birds could possibly be a little bit more attracted to granular type products. So, you know, if you are concerned about birds, maybe apply that pre-emergent herbicide as a liquid spray instead as applied as a granular, you know. So just probably not going to be a problem, but just something to keep in mind. That could, so I'm actually going to answer this next question because I recently wrote an article about it. From Zoom, why can't we get rid of sticker weed? And you guys can chime in after I answer. I assume we're talking about lawn burrweed here, the bane of everybody's existence. I was actually talking about that weed with our program assistant this morning. We've helped her dad successfully fight it. So Burrweed is bad. I mean, my parents have this problem. My brother was complaining to me the other day, about a month ago, I guess. Of course, in the South, the other day can mean many things. But the other day, he was walking around in flip-flops and said soles were worn down a little bit and the burrweed was poking him through his flip-flops. So it's a aggressive little weed. But the biggest problem I see people have controlling this weed is they wait until, the end of the season when they're feeling these burrs become a problem to control. And yes, you can spray and kill the top growth and maybe even kill the weed, but the seed has been set. The plant has flowered, the seed has been set. And so the plant's back next year, even if you think you've killed it. So two keys to managing lawn burrweed. As Larry just mentioned with that pre-emergent herbicide, we want to get that out in the fall. I noticed lawn burrweed had some pictures of it like a day or two after emergence this year, the first week of November. So about mid-October, you want to start thinking about getting that pre-emergent out to prevent that burrweed from coming up. It is an annual weed, a cool season annual weed. So we want to control it before it germinates in that cool season. So early mid-October, you want to start thinking about that. And then I like to have my clients scout their lawn, and if they see spots that they missed or the burrweed emerged through the pre-emergent, you want to come back in with just a simple 2,4-D based or a triple formulation herbicide like Beth mentioned with the Speed Zone or something like that. And that is just a little post-emergent. You can come in when those weeds are still small, they'll be less than half an inch or so height. You'll see them spread out with those little fan branches. So scouting is important, but you spray them early with a post-emergent broadleaf herbicide like that, and you can wipe them out. And so that combination of pre-emergent in October, follow up probably around Christmas with what you missed, and you should be good to go. What do you guys have to add about lawn burrweed?
I was going to add that, common names can be tricky. So, what sticker weed, I have people calling sand spurs and
True.
All sorts of, so there's
I was
also
just assuming
clover.
burrweed, but you're correct.
Yeah, there's another clover that also sets spiky seeds that people will send me pictures of. So
Yeah.
Consult your local extension office, send us a photo of, what weed you're dealing with. And that way we can be pretty specific. Daniel just gave you the spiel for burrweed, but it may be different depending on the weed.
Exactly. So because sand spur is a grass, sand burr, that's going to be a totally different way we're going to treat that. So good call, Mark. One thing I forgot to mention on that, these weeds tend to emerge in areas where the grass is thin and unhealthy. So all of these practices we've been talking about with keeping a healthy turf are going to help. Larry or Beth, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, one thing about weeds, we do a lot of weed ID here at the office or over the phone or through pictures, but when you bring us a bouquet of weeds, we're going to tell you it's too late to manage it at that time.
Yeah.
So anytime, I know it's big and mature and you see it in the lawn or in your flower bed, but when we have this giant mound of a really mature weed, there's not a lot that can be done other than hand pulling or, knocking it back with something that's going to kill everything. So Daniel mentioned when they're young, that's when we really have to manage these weeds.
Yep. Good call.
Daniel,
yes,
you mentioned thinning areas. Weeds move in where the lawn thins. There's almost no exception to that. People think sometimes the weed is so aggressive, it's actually killing the grass and taking it out. And if they solve the weed problem, then the grass grows back. You're getting it backwards. You need to investigate this. And again, through your local, extension office, if you can find out why is the lawn, quote, unhappy. It could be because of the growing conditions, too much shade, tree competition, you're mowing too low, you're fertilizing, watering incorrectly. Getting to the root cause of why are weeds so prevalent in my lawn. Sometimes you just basically have to start over with a new lawn. But
we're trying to avoid that, but it can get to that point.
The weeds move in where the lawn thins.
Good. Yeah, it's good advice to remember. So Mark, back to you. So we have a crabgrass question next to dollarweed and lawn burrweed. This may be the next most asked about weed. So besides pulling it out or using chemicals, are there any other ways to get rid of this stuff?
Let's see, I'm thinking of my IPM toolbox.
Yep.
You got physical, cultural, right? So first thing, we just talked about, make sure your lawn is really healthy and thick to prevent weeds. That's through cultural practices. Physical, pulling it out. Also mowing, so you can try to mow it before it sets seed to reduce how much seed is there the next time. But then all you're left with pretty much is chemical. So besides pulling and use of herbicides, I would say the only thing you got left is good cultural practices, just to make sure that the grass is as healthy as possible to try to outcompete those weeds. If you do get it, you know, the crabgrass, that's where it's mostly through the use of those pre-emergents. So I think we had a link coming up on crabgrass control. You know, it's hard when you have a grassy weed mixed in with your grassy lawn. There's less products kind of available for that. So pre-emergents are the way to go that one. I think dithiopyr, you guys can back me up. I think dithiopyr is a product that's recommended for crabgrass control.
Yeah. So I like your thought about mowing. You know, that can help, especially if you've got a thin, you know, if you're getting a lawn established from seed or something and you don't have a lot of herbicide options, you know, just keeping it mowed on a regular basis is going to reduce that crabgrass a lot. So good call, Mark. So a question from Zoom for Beth. What is the best way to kill weeds without killing the grass? And we've covered a lot of this, but if you just give us a thought or two here.
Killing weeds without killing the grass. So you already have existing weeds. The best way is to hand pull, kind of march up and down there, hand pull and take care of that. But you're really going to change some of your practices of why you have the weeds. You're going to water only as needed. Make sure your fertilizer is applied to make that turf healthy and not overdoing it. And then also mowing. Make sure you're mowing at the correct height for that grass. And then that's going to help make the grass healthier and reduce some of that weed population with your hand pulling and those other cultural practices.
Yeah, that's excellent. So what I want from each of you three here, Larry, Beth, and Mark here, just some general, if you could sum up your thoughts on weed control and turf grass in a sentence or two, what would you say, Beth? We'll start with you.
I'm very tolerant. So, you know, a lot of weeds for me have other alternative purposes. Some of the weeds, you know, are very popular with a lot of our pollinators. So kind of be patient, be understanding. It's a natural environment and we don't always have control over what happens in that natural environment. So kind of realize that and realize that everything's a system too. So you can have a good looking turf, but sometimes we just let nature run its course.
All right. So Beth is advocating tolerance in the yard. So, and modify your expectations, maybe. Mark, if you had to sum up your thoughts on weeds and turf grass, what would it be in a sentence or two?
I love Beth's answer to tolerate them. I'm a botanist, right? So when I see weeds in the yard, I get excited because I get orchids and violets and all sorts of things pop up. But, you know, it's all about those cultural practices, I think. Just making sure you're watering it right, mowing it right, fertilizing if it needs it, and making sure the grass is as healthy as possible to outcompete those weeds.
Larry, give us a final thought on the turf grass.
Most weeds, or at least many weeds that we deal with, things that we've identified as weeds, happen to be Florida native plants, some of which have Florida in their name, like Florida betony weed, Florida bellflower, Florida pusley. We mentioned dollarweed. When you really look at this, we've kind of, you know, if you think about it from that standpoint, with no exception, all of our lawn grasses were introduced to this country from other countries. So
Sure.
when you look at the basic definition for a weed as a plant out of place, what's out of place? The native weed, what we're calling weeds, or the grass. Sometimes we may step back too, where you've had just a history of problems with weeds, and there may be other underlying factors like big trees, shade, tree competition. Sometimes you just need to simply look at what you're doing, and there may be a better alternative. You're trying to grow grass where grass just is not going to grow. And when there's been a history of fighting this battle.
Very good.
Get with your local extension agent and look at alternatives if you're willing to go there.
Good thoughts. So as a small county extension agent, I deal with horticulture and ag. So I'm gonna give my thought as a little bit more from my row crop producer perspective. So I want you to scout often and spray early if you're going to turn to chemicals. So that's my recommendation for you. So final weed question, Mark, this is from Facebook, just came in a little while ago. How can I control spreading of invasive plants like Mexican petunias? They're beginning to pop up in the lawn and I want to remove them. go for it.
So let's see, maybe something you could do for Mexican petunia. You could try, of course, mowing sometimes will slow some of these things down from spreading. And then what you could potentially do, and you guys help me out with this one, mow it down as it starts to come back up. Maybe use some of those selective broadleaf herbicides to try to, again, it won't hurt the grass, but it'll keep knocking that stuff back. So hopefully enough stressing by mowing and then hitting with herbicide will eventually get that out of there.
Okay, sounds
Hey,
good.
You
Yes,
may
Beth.
just have to dig it out and redo a grass area. You know, some of these do have deep root systems, and you know, Mark's idea of mowing when they're young is great. If they get more established, they're going to have lots of food reserves that come back. So sometimes you don't want to go that route, but you're just going to have to old-fashioned dig it out and redo.
Yeah.
Exercise.
Yeah, good deal. All right, so we're going to transition a little bit to insect and animal pest control on the lawn. So, Beth, since you're right here with us, how do you control insects and turf grass, particularly mole crickets?
All right. So insects, and we don't, with extension, a lot of times, you know, we don't like to do a lot of preventative unless it's something really serious. Our preventative are really maintaining a healthy turf. So we're looking for those first symptoms of some insect problems. Daniel mentioned scouting. When you notice something different, give us a call, send us a picture, bring in a sample so that we can diagnose that early. With mole crickets, you know, in recent years, mole crickets for me in Pensacola don't seem to have been as much of a problem because we've introduced other biological controls of those. But mole crickets is really something that you can monitor for in your lawn with one of our soapy solutions. So mix you up about 3 tablespoons and 2 gallons of water of a dishwashing liquid. Pour that over about 4 square foot area of turf. And, you know, that's going to irritate whatever's there and it's going to come to the surface. And if you have mole crickets, you will know. So you're not guessing on using a pesticide when it's not needed. So that's key. So then you can treat if it's needed. And there are biological controls, remember, for mole crickets that we can share with you. One is using the wildflower spermaceti to attract the larva wasp that lays eggs on it. And that does show really good management of mole crickets. But some pests are really more cosmetic. You know, chinch bugs can kill a St. Augustine lawn, and you likely need to treat with a chemical to manage those. But other pests just may be cosmetic. And so it doesn't always mean you treat or make a decision to do something to kill that when you notice it. Let us help you out if you notice these issues.
Awesome. Great answer. Mark, we've had several questions both from Facebook and Zoom on this one. How do you get rid of fire ant mounds in the lawn? It seems like we get a big wave of fire ants early in the year, and then they're kind of sporadic the rest of the year. How do we get rid of those?
Well, consider that you may never be able to totally get rid of them. So that expectation of ridding your lawn forever of fire ants.
All right. Let's reduce fire ants.
Yeah, we can reduce them, but it's likely we'll never eliminate them. So we're going to do all we can to reduce it. So there's a really great resource that I think we're going to share with you, Fire Ant Control from the University of Florida IFAS. There's a couple things. And you've probably heard of all these different kind of these tales of things you can use, like grits or hot water and, you know, these various things. And some of them are true, some of them not so true. So there's been research, right? So that's what's great about Extension. We do research and we find out what works best for these problems. And what they find is basically you want to use a mix of things, right? So the big thing is using these baited products. And I like to recommend folks, kind of like what Beth said with, you know, not to be so preventative all the time, but to kind of, you want to be preventing problems, but with, you know, the insects aren't there, don't necessarily put pesticides all over the place, but being selective in using baits to kind of, you know, these baits, the ants come out, they take it down to the queen, and that gets the queen, and then that gets the mound. So using these bait products, Amdro's, you know, a really common product.
Yeah.
And using that in mix with maybe every now and again, I think one of the recommendations that is a couple of days after you treat with the bait, follow up with that boiling hot water. I just always tell people to be very safe with drenching mounds with hot water because, you don't want to burn yourself. It takes quite a few gallons of hot water to get a whole ant colony.
Probably wouldn't do your turf grass any favors either.
And yeah, you're going to burn the grass there too. So usually it's a mix of baits, and I've found pretty good success using these baited products. The thing is they move around, and ant biology is really kind of confusing too. So it's a matter of trying to reduce them as best you can through use of these baited products.
That'll work for me. And we've got some good, Matt Lawler, our backstage facilitator here, has got us some really good options over there in the chat box. So last question, our insects and animals for Beth. How do you get rid of moles in the yard? So not an insect, but an animal.
No, well, you're probably asking the wrong person again, because moles to me are very beneficial. If we look at what they're doing, they're eating the insects and arthropods and other organisms that are in the soil for us, and they're really going to like that loose soil area. So maybe if your yard is not, the thickest, the most uniform coverage, that's where you're going to see the mole issues. So kind of realize that for a healthy, really dense lawn, you won't notice the issues. And also realize when we go through these droughts, water is happening in your yard. So the moles are going to be drawn into that. If you can water deeply, only as needed, that moves the insects and their food source a little bit deeper. So we really need to be more tolerant of moles and not worry about trying to kill them and trap them, and realize they're just part of the natural environment too.
Yeah.
Can I share a mole fact?
You can share a quick mole fact.
Mole fact. Moles are able to slightly bite the head of an earthworm and paralyze them, and they go and they put them in like a larder and save them for later.
Facts that we may or may not have needed, but we have. Thank you, Mark. So, all right, we're going to move to fertilizing lawns. And since Mark provided us with that wonderful fact, we'll start with him. Mark, how should we fertilize our lawn? Our lawn's a mix, like many of us. We planted a grass and things have moved in over time. So we've got a mix of St. Augustine, zoysia, centipede, and Bermuda. So they've got everything except Bahia. How should we sucker?
Congratulations. Good job. So, the one thing that you want to be careful with is a lot of those. So there's been research done on how much nutrition each one of these grass species needs to do well. And what they find is, I think your St. Augustine, your zoysia, and your Bermuda are pretty similar. They're kind of on the higher end of needing fertilizer. Your centipede's at the very, very low end. The problem is if you treat it all the same and you put the same amount out for the Bermuda, the St. Augustine, or the zoysia, you're going to be kind of setting your centipede up for problems. So, that's one where you either go with just the centipede recommendation. Always recommend getting a soil test. Maybe you don't need fertilizer. Maybe your lawn's doing just fine, or your soil's just fine. But if you're going to go with one, I'd say, go with the centipede recommendation. If you can, if that centipede is like, one solid chunk, then maybe what you could do is treat that separately from the rest. So it's kind of what I got. Any ideas?
I agree. Yeah. So like you said, if you're managing for zoysia or St. Augustine, you're probably going to reduce your centipede because it doesn't want all that nutrition. And vice versa, if you decide you want centipede, like we talked about with Beth, the poor man's grass, it's probably going to reduce that zoysia, St. Augustine a little bit. I honestly don't think Bermuda cares, particularly if it's not an improved Bermuda. If it's a common Bermuda, you're going to have it. But yeah, so just pick which one you want to kind of prefer and manage for that, and let the others do what they may, I would say. Good job, Mark. Larry, so that's another common lawn question. When should lime be used? And I would also give you where should lime be used as far as turfgrass species?
Be cautious with lime. Some people think lime is the answer to all problems. Lime should only be applied when you have the results of a reliable soil test indicating lime is needed. That's the basics. There is a link that from your University of Florida EDIS website. There's also a website on Your Florida Lawn. That's an excellent resource. But The one on soil sampling and testing for the home landscape, I think it includes vegetable gardens as well. We'll give you information, but check with your local extension office to see if they offer testing the soil for pH. If they do, you may go there. If they don't, all extension offices in Florida will be your connection to how to submit a sample to the University of Florida Extension Soils Lab. But don't guess soil tests. Never play that guessing game. Lime should only be applied when you have the results of a reliable soil test, not when your neighbor said that they did it and it improved their lawn. Only when you have the results of a reliable soil test indicating the pH and that lime is needed.
Very good. Thanks, Larry. And so if you fill out that soil sample form accurately and you put centipede grass on it, you're probably not going to be liming. But if you fill out the soil test form accurately, it's going to tell you, do you need lime or not? Excellent job,
And
Lee.
collect your sample well.
Yeah, follow the directions and ask for help if you need it. We're here. So Beth, our final question on fertilizing, and we'll move through these next couple fairly quickly. Should I add any fertilizer or weed killer to lawn now?
Yeah, a lot of times with lawns, if you're happy with the growth, we're getting a little more rain and it's growing well, and the visual appearance is suitable for you, don't worry about adding more fertilizer right now. Now, some people in midsummer may use a half rate of fertilizer, and then the other half as we get to maybe the 1st of September. If you see some yellowing that's not disease related, you may want to think about either a liquid or a chelated iron. That may be after you talk with us about that situation. But, stay away from the iron oxide. Those are not valuable for the lawn. But
Nope.
It's not necessary if you're happy right now, and the growth is good to apply a fertilizer. And then we've already talked about the cautions with herbicides.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and a vacuum, great answer. I mean, they don't give us much context, about their lawn or the condition of the lawn, but that's really good. So we're going to transition to our much talked about and teased cultural practices and lawn section. So Larry, we'll start with you on Zoom for cultural practices. So tell us how to encourage grass to fill in empty spaces in the lawn. Should I loosen soil or add topsoil and use starter fertilizer? What do?
Well, going back to, determining why the lawn is not happy is kind of a starting point. Why is the lawn not doing as well as it should?
Yeah, why is it sparse?
What's that?
Yeah, why is it sparse,
Yeah. Other than that, you definitely want to end up with, you can't just take good sod or seeds and expect good results putting that over an ill-prepared site where it's compacted, there's a mix of lawn grass and weeds. You have to do a little work, and if you want grass there, and you have to, you want to end up with a loose, level, clean planting bed to plant your seed, sod, or plugs.
Yeah, that's good. Do you think there's any point in using a starter fertilizer, Beth?
No, you don't want to use any starter fertilizer where there's not active turf grass roots growing. That's going to be fertilizer that's lost off site. But if it's a small area, you may just fill in with a little compost or cow manure and let the grass kind of creep in if it's not that big. That's another option for you too.
Yeah, good call. All right, Beth Bowles, so while we've got you here, when's the best time to water the lawn?
So with watering, the best time to water is in the morning. That doesn't always work for some of us that have a job. I have to water in the evening, and that's not ideal for my lawn. I'm not going to get up at 4 and turn it on. But in the morning, early morning before 10 o'clock, you're allowing that moisture to dry, and then that's going to help prevent some of the diseases on that turf.
Okay, very good. And I mean, a lot of times, I think you just teased it there. Your irrigation is not going to be just on a timer. It's not going to be, or it may be on a timer, but it's not going to be on a set schedule. We're going to irrigate as we need it. Very good. I'm the same way. There is no watering before daylight for this guy. So Mark Tansig, how often should a lawn be aerated or dethatched, and which method is preferred?
So I think the first thing you got to ask is, why are you doing either one? So a lot of times aeration is probably truly only needed when you have compacted soil, right? Because you want to loosen that soil up a little bit. I think it can help. Larry mentioned traffic earlier, so it can also help with, reducing the compaction from traffic. Folks often use aeration though to handle the thatch problem. So thatch is usually associated, and hopefully everyone knows what thatch is. So I don't know if we can, I think there's some links coming up that'll show you a picture of what thatch looks like. But thatch is like that, when you walk across the lawn, it's very spongy. It's basically all the old dead leaves and stems and stuff that kind of accumulate. If you have a thatch problem, that's usually where you want to look at those cultural practices. So is it being mowed properly? Is it being watered properly? Is it being fertilized properly? Check all those things. If you still have a bunch of thatch, aeration is one method where you would go and aerate it, and then you would kind of top dress it with sand, maybe a compost to kind of naturally break down that thatch material. Otherwise, you have to, you would really get a dethatcher, a professional piece of equipment that, is pretty rough on the grass and it looks pretty bad when you're finished. But that will, that's really what you need to get the thatch out. Now, they also have those old school rakes, right? The dethatching rakes, where it's like the metal aluminum looking stuff where you just kind of, just rip that stuff out of there. But if you have a thatch problem, you do want to go back and look and see, how are you mowing, watering, and fertilizing, and what's causing the thatch to build up in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's good. It also, it can depend on the turf grass species, like Mark said, and how you manage it. So if you've got a zoysia that you're just growing the heck out of, pushing the water and fertilizer to it, got that mowing height up a little bit, you're going to deal with more thatch. If you've got a centipede grass lawn that you don't irrigate or fertilize and just kind of exists and is okay, probably doesn't need to ever be thatched. I did have a client fairly recently, actually, that almost totally destroyed a centipede lawn thatching it. So just evaluate. Don't just thatch or aerate because you hear somebody doing it or you think you should. Like Mark said, ask why. So Beth, should grass clippings be left on the lawn after it's been mowed? Does it hurt the grass that remains?
Yeah, grass clippings are wonderful for the lawn, for most of our turf grasses. So if you're growing centipede, St. Augustine, Bermuda, others, it's good. The one exception is zoysia. What we found is zoysia has a lot of silica in that blade. And if you're mowing routinely, which is like every 5 days or so, those grass clippings may not break down fast enough with all those microbes working on them, like in the other grasses, and add those nutrients back. So you might want to consider bagging that zoysia, adding it to your compost pile, or using it around other areas of your landscape. So for most grasses, except zoysia, consider letting the clippings drop.
Very good. So on a quick move back to the thatch question, we had a follow up there. Just want to address timing of thatching. Should you need it? When should you dethatch? Any of y'all?
Yeah, you really want to start dethatching after the grass is actively growing in the spring, and you want to finish that before we really get into midsummer, because you need time for that grass to recover. You can't do this in the winter. You can't do this in the late summer as we're moving into fall, because you are really going to have a mess on your hands and you're going to end up with a weed patch after that. It's a very invasive procedure for that turf, and there's specific requirements. So make sure you talk to us or talk to a professional who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. So for our attendees here, we've reached 1 o'clock. We're going to press on with a couple of questions. If you need to, get out of here, go ahead, but we've got just a few more. So if you'll bear with us, we'll try to move through them pretty quickly and get your questions answered. So Larry, should you water your lawn in the winter?
Kind of a yes and no. If during the winter when the lawn grass is dormant, and we're talking about North Florida, our lawn grasses will slow down and go into somewhat of a dormant state. During that time, the grass doesn't need as much water. You can cause damage by continuing to water too much. So like Beth has said, I think others, water on an as-needed basis. If you were watering during the growing season and you're basically watering on an as-needed basis, and you're applying water in the absence of sufficient rainfall, maybe, 3 times a week during the hot, dry summer months. During the winter when the grass is dormant, and we're not getting rain, you might have to water once every couple of weeks just to keep that root system moist and preventing damage. So water on an as needed basis. Remember, the grass is dormant during the winter and will not need as much water.
Yeah, and I mean, we periodically, we consistently, generally in the winter, get these cold fronts that push through once every week or two. So a lot of times, just leave it off during the winter. So a final question on cultural practices. Are there any disadvantages to using well water for turf? I'll pose that to the whole group. Anybody?
Well, I mean, you probably want to test your well water. You know, University of Florida has a nice water testing lab that you can collect a sample from that well water and send it off, and they'll give you some basic information on the pH, electrical conductivity, you know, the salts. So that may be an issue. Sometimes the pH on certain well water may be high. Depending on if you're a coastal resident, it may have certain nutrients in it that may not be necessary or be overload for some plants. So make sure you test it. But for many people, well water is a great alternative for irrigation.
All right. So Beth, we're going to stick with you for, we're going to get to a turf grass alternative here. We saved this for the end. So I've purchased a perfect centipede lawn, but with no wildlife value. What lawn plants can I slip in and still have happy neighbors?
We always like happy neighbors for sure. The lawn, it's exactly true. The lawn doesn't have a lot of wildlife value, but there are some things that will like the open lawn area, those being native solitary bees. So that may be something in a lawn that you promote with that open lawn area. But really, to increase the wildlife, you may consider a couple of ground covers if you don't mind a mixed lawn and you've got a large enough space for them to creep. One is powder puff mimosa. You do need room for that. Has nice pink flowers that bees love. Or you may consider one of the turf type of perennial peanut. I have that mixed into my lawn, and, you know, I mow for the grass, the centipede, and, you know, I'll get some nice flowers on that as well. You don't really want that to creep into your neighbor, so you may need a border. Other than that, you're really going to work on reducing the amount of lawn you have for wildlife and putting in native plants along your border.
Very good. Good call.
Good call, Beth, on you want to keep a happy neighbor, but you also don't want your perennial peanut to invade their, you know, pristine lawn.
It's not, both of those are not for small lawns for sure.
Right. Yeah. I will say I have perennial peanut as by itself in a lawn, but man, is it aggressive trying to get into flower beds. So I would assume it would do the same thing to a neighbor's lawn. So very good. Mark, propagating, encouraging native grasses at the street edge of front yard beyond my flower beds in full sun and sand. What you got? Any native grasses for that type of area? It sounds like it's going to be hot and dry.
Sound like she wants to encourage the ones that are growing, or she wants to add to, or they want to add to this area.
It seems like we want to add to this area.
So native grasses for sand, full sun. As long as you are not expecting to keep this as a turf, right? You're just looking for a ornamental type grass. I mean, I think muley grass would be a pretty good choice.
Yeah.
I think we're safe. Love grass is a really good one. It's got a really pretty, both have very, you know, showy flower spikes, and they're native.
There you go. Muley grass, love grass, two good options for you.
And I put that, we did put the iNaturalist app here, because one thing you can do, if there's things popping up in your yard all by themselves, you know, one thing you could try to rely on just what's naturally coming up. And this iNaturalist, it's an app you can get for your phone that's pretty good about identifying, you know, you can take a picture of whatever's popping up in your yard, and, you know, it can help you figure out what it is and then decide, you know, what do I want to do with this?
Yeah. So Mark, we'll keep with you for a second. So what are the best ways to set up an edible lawn?
So an edible lawn, I think, you know, you could indirectly eat your lawn by getting chickens and sheeps and goats and cattle maybe, but, you know, it sounds like this is not talking necessarily about a turf, right? Because I guess you could have a dollarweed lawn like Larry and Beth, and you can eat dollarweed, so you could have an edible dollarweed lawn.
Sure.
But otherwise, it sounds like, you know, they're talking maybe about adding you know, edible plants into the landscape, and that's a really good thing to do. And so you can pop in some fruit trees maybe instead of having, you know, just nothing but lawn, you know, some citrus, some other kind of hardy fruit trees. And then again, maybe you throw some vegetables around there. So there's some mustard greens, for example, that can be really pretty and showy with nice purple leaves. Maybe you have a citrus tree in the front and you put some nice purple mustards or curly kale, and you get a little bit of a, you know, a dinner plate there in your front yard too. But you can't eat grass.
Yeah, you don't have a rumen, which is necessary to eat grass.
Right. You would need a couple more stomachs, right? Or a crop.
Yeah, exactly. So Mark, while we've got you here talking about, you know, edible lawns, alternative stuff, tell us some alternatives to grass lawns. Let's say I just moved into a house with a bare lawn, new clean slate, and I don't want grass, but I do want to, you know, something low. What can I do?
Well, we mentioned sunshine mimosa. That's really pretty. A lot of these, you notice your local Department of Transportation is putting them in the medians a lot. So sunshine mimosa, look out for that one. Perennial peanut's a good one. I really like turkey tangle fog fruit. You guys know turkey tangle fog fruit, phyla. Yeah. That's a really cool. Plant. That's a really cool little native plant. I often see it in the medians just popping up by itself, but you can actually, you know, get some and easily propagate it and put it in your lawn. You know, those are the ones I think of for like low sunny conditions. If you have some shady spots, that's where, you know, things like that Asiatic jasmine type of thing, you just got to be careful because all these spread, right? So all these can move from where you put them. So just remember that they may not stay where you originally put them. And we have some really good resources, including a really good article from you, Daniel, on, I think it was perennial peanut and sunshine mimosa from Gardening the Panhandle. Yeah. And I think we have a link up here coming up with a link to Dr. Gary Knox's presentation on alternatives to turf grass as well.
Yeah.
That frog fruit's really good if it's wet or moist. Yeah. So if you can't really grow grass as well, you know, that frog fruit or Lipia, whatever the new name is, that's a nice one.
Yeah, that is. And I do have some experience with perennial peanut and sunshine mimosa. And I will say for the average homeowner that wants a monoculture, perennial peanut's easier because there are a number of herbicide options. Sunshine mimosa, your herbicide options just aren't there. So
yeah, all these ground covers, it's important to say too that they often can't handle traffic like turf. So if you're expecting like to be able to walk on these things, that's turf is going to be your way to go. That's going to be your best option. And
I was telling
weed, right? Weeds are going to be a problem in all these too.
I was telling these guys earlier, you know, I love my perennial peanut dearly. You can see my yard when you turn on the street because it's the yellow one. But man, I will never be playing a football game. You know, it's just not wear tolerant, and it can be a bear to manage with the weeds. So, Beth, unfortunately, the gentleman who posted this question is not with us still in this topic. But who? So we've talked about this lawn and we've grown it now. Who's going to mow it?
Hey, who's going to mow it? Well, you don't even need to hire anyone anymore. You buy a new robotic mower.
That's true.
And there's lots of brands. Our colleague, Matt Lawler in Santa Rosa County wrote a nice article on that, detailing the research at our West Florida Research and Education Center. I've got a master gardener who has one who loves it. You put a nice guide wire around, it docks itself, it comes out and mows in different directions. So this is the new way to go, the robotic mower.
Yeah, if you've got a small area for a lawn, you know, a couple thousand square feet, I mean, definitely, I think probably worth the investment. $1,200, $1,500 for a, you know, Husqvarna or a little bit more for a Mimo. You got your robotic mower. Just like what's the thing for the inside, the vacuum, the Roomba?
The Roomba.
This is the Roomba for the lawn, and it is real, and it works. You might want to check it out.
Now you do have to have a flat lawn, right? No roots, no leaves.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Need to be pretty flat. Last question that we officially have, Larry, can you recommend ground covers for erosion that aren't too aggressive? That's a hard one because ground covers are by definition aggressive. Or any info on preventing erosion and helping plants get established before washing away. So I'm thinking we've got a slope here and we want to get a ground cover established, or a turf or whatever, without erosion. So how can we mitigate that erosion?
The problem with this is the rains that we get, and I've actually seen people and felt sorry for them that attempted to seed even slightly sloping areas. You know, the rains that we get, and you can put the centipede grass seed, Bahia grass seed, or Bermuda grass seed out, and all of your investment and time is washed away with one good rainstorm or shower.
Yeah.
That's the problem with slopes. You almost have to use something vegetatively if you're dealing with a slope where there's erosion. And when everything's said and done, grass, lawn grass, turf grass ends up being one of our better plants to use to stabilize soil to prevent erosion, because it has such a fibrous root system. But it has to be cared for in some ways. Seeding would be only with centipede, Bahia, or Bermuda grasses. There are some options where you could use other plant material based on, I'd have to see the site, based on how large of an area it is. You could even get into shrubs and trees that can help stabilize the soil. That's about the best I can do. You may also want to check with if it's a larger area, with your local Natural Resource Conservation Service that may be able to provide some help when it comes to stabilizing the soil.
Yeah, very good. So what we did last time and what we're going to do again here is to kind of like we did with weeds. I just want to kind of y'all to give us some parting shots on turf. If you want one kind of take home message. So Mark, what are you going to leave us with today?
I just want to tell folks, turf tends to have a bad reputation, right? That it's, this desert and a monoculture and it's terrible, terrible, terrible. But, turf does have a good role in a landscape, and it doesn't necessarily have to be so bad, right? Like we talked about, mine's got weeds, I got orchids that pop up and violets and pollinators that come. So turf can be very, can work really well for certain situations and not be such a desert for wildlife. And the main things is mow it right, water it right, and fertilize it properly. And it will usually, take good care of you.
All right, Larry, what you going to leave us with?
Step back. It's your property. Take some time to do a little bit of homework. Decide where lawn grass is needed, where it's functional, where it serves a purpose. There's plenty of areas in most landscapes where there are other options other than lawn grass. It doesn't have to be wall-to-wall lawn grass. Once you decide where lawn grass is needed, know the grass that you're dealing with, the nature of the beast essentially, and manage it appropriately based on the lawn grass you have. Centipede is managed distinctly different from Bermuda, for example. And my final comment is have patience.
Yeah, that's a good one for everyday life and lawn grass. All right, Beth, tell us.
That's good advice from my colleagues. I appreciate that. All I'm going to end with is say sometimes just look up. Stop looking at the turf. Just look up, and you won't know you have an issue or any problems with your turf.
Yeah, just drive by it fast enough. It'll all be green. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really good. And so I'm just going to leave you with, check out these resources that we've put together for you here. Do your homework. Use your extension agents. We're here. We want to help. And I think we can help. So I appreciate everybody for being on today. Please take a few minutes to fill out our, we have a really short survey after this webinar that those of you that registered through Zoom will get as soon as this ends, I believe. So please fill that out for us. And please join us in 2 weeks for our next Gardening in the Panhandle live session. I believe it will be on ornamentals and landscaping stuff. So if you have any ornamental questions or you're a landscaper and enjoy that sort of thing, send us some questions. Be thinking and join us in 2 weeks. And with that, we're going to be out of here, and we appreciate y'all for joining, and we hope you have a really good weekend and a good Friday tomorrow. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.